I spent 2 years there doing all my pre-med studies. I had originally graduated from UCLA in nursing, worked as a nurse for a couple of years, lived in San Diego, and then decided to become pre-med. So when I was at San Diego, that library there was in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it really was kind of at the edge of campus. And the last time I was at UCSD, I was blown away by how much construction. I mean, the campus is completely different from when I was there. But I'm sure it's just as hard to study organic chemistry on the beach now as it was then. It was very hard to study when it was just gorgeous outside most of the time. So anyway, you guys should enjoy your time at UCSD as much as possible. So let me just quickly talk about One Health. One Health is very simply the concept that human, animal, and environmental or ecosystem health are linked. That might seem obvious to you, but that's generally not what we do. And this concept provides a useful framework then for examining and for analyzing complex issues such as food security, emerging diseases, and antimicrobial resistance. So One Health is it looks at the upstream drivers of disease, trying to get to the root causes of issues such as emerging zoonoses and antimicrobial resistance. And we have to understand these root causes if we want to develop effective policies to address them. And let me just remind you that we interact with our environment in the most profound of ways by breathing air, drinking water and other fluids, and ingesting food, including meat and dairy products or plants, whatever. We're ingesting parts of the environment into our bodies every single day. So just keep that in mind. That website, onehealthinitiative.com, my colleagues and I get no funding for this. This is a labor of love. We are thrilled when you come and visit our website. Our webmaster, Dr. Bruce Kaplan, is retired, and he gets very happy whenever somebody visits the website. So please make Bruce happy. Visit the website, tell your friends and colleagues to visit the website, and help just understand what One Health is. So what is food security? Well, it's an agricultural term, and it basically means no hungry people. And in the World Food Summit of 1996, food security exists when all people at all times have the physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs. And it's built on 3 pillars: food availability, food access or affordability, and food use. And we generally take food security for granted here in the US because we haven't ever had problems really with it. We should not take it for granted because, well, climate change, for one, threatens agriculture, which is the foundations of civilization. But 2, a pandemic, as we are discovering now, it also will affect the food workers who we rely on to provide our food. So let's hope that we do not face any shortages in the future as this pandemic goes on. Food security, or zero hunger, is the United Nations #2 goal. They've developed 17 goals, 17 sustainable development goals by 2030. And we still have a long way to go, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try for all of these, for these efforts. And then, so zoonotic diseases are diseases of animals that infect people, and it goes both ways. The animals share their microbes with us, and we share our microbes with the animals. And many of these diseases, including SARS and COVID-19, are emerging either directly or indirectly from our demand for meat and other animal proteins. And I'll be getting more into that in a minute. So here in the United States, we are one of the largest consumers of meat per capita in the world. Other countries, including Australia, New Zealand, and Argentina, are high meat consumers, but really we're at the top of the list. and that does have implications for our risk for zoonotic diseases. But while we have been at the top for many years, other countries with increasing affluence, including China and Brazil, they're having their meat intake go up as well. Now, interestingly, if you look at the bottom, India has, as its intake of meat and animal proteins is also increasing, but they have about 40% of their population is vegetarian because of Hinduism. And while they certainly have their challenges with antimicrobial resistance, they are not having the coronavirus spillover events the way China is. Now, China has a strong culture of eating exotic animals, and they were the Guangdong province was where SARS emerged in 2003 from their live animal markets. And now the belief is that COVID-19 emerged from the wild animal market. There's a long tradition of eating wild animals, which might predispose them to more of these coronavirus spillover events. Compared to India, they both have over 1 billion people. So this was a study that was recently published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, looking at these global shifts in mammalian population, trying to predict the risk of spillover events. And while we tend to focus on wildlife, primarily bats, since they seem to be the reservoir host species for so many of these deadly viruses, this paper found that domesticated animals, including pigs and cattle, actually are the mammalian species with the highest number of viruses that they share with humans. So pigs, cattle, horses, sheep, and dogs. We generally don't think about our companion animals, but they certainly play a role as well, and I'll talk a bit about that. And let's not forget that MERS was a spillover event in Saudi Arabia, and that wasn't from eating the animals. That was, you had 4 sick camels and they got their handlers sick. So it's not even so much eating the animals or consuming their products, it's also being in close proximity to them. But this process of sharing microbes with animals has been going on for centuries. I mean, this isn't a new phenomenon. Since the dawn of animal domestication, humans have been living in close proximity to animals. And so, for example, measles diverged from rinderpest, which was a deadly viral disease of cattle, around the 11th century. That's what genetic analyses suggest. So again, these diseases, including brucellosis from goats and sheep, Q fever, tularemia, and even the prion disease, mad cow, most recently, these are all emerging from our domesticated animals into people. And then, of course, there's the wild animal consumption or bushmeat consumption. Again, that's going to include bats, the civet cats, and the pangolins. And so just as we have zoonotic disease transmission risk from our domesticated animals, we certainly have it with the wild animals. Let's not forget AIDS. And so in this talk, I'm going to focus on the coronaviruses, SARS in China from 2003, MERS from Saudi Arabia in 2012, and now COVID-19 from China that emerged in 2019. And we don't know what else is going to happen, but again, it's almost certainly a matter of when, not if. So the zoonotic threats are sizable. About 60% of all human pathogens or microbes that cause disease are zoonotic, diseases of animals that infect humans. About 75% of these newly emerging pathogens are, and most agents of bioterrorism, including anthrax and Ebola and glanders, they're all zoonotic diseases as well. These diseases are appearing all around the world. This isn't just one country, but there are some hot spots, including Africa and Asia, where there's a lot of close contact between people and animals, whether they're domesticated or wild. Now, this was a very interesting paper published in Clinical Microbiology Reviews in October of 2007, looking at it was a review article on SARS as a potential emerging and re-emerging infection. And if you notice what's highlighted in yellow, the presence of large reservoir of SARS-CoV-like viruses in horseshoe bats, together with the culture of eating exotic animals in southern China, is a time bomb. So this was recognized very early on that this practice is a problem. And indeed, in the end of 2019, 2020, you had the Wuhan coronavirus that emerged. The bats are reservoir host series, and this virus is certainly related to SARS. Now, there is some question, there is some murky evidence that this might have been from a laboratory accident. There is a high containment laboratory in Wuhan that does research on viruses, and there is some circumstantial evidence that the virus might have been a biosafety lapse in the laboratory, and that a lab researcher might have inadvertently got infected and then set off the pandemic. We don't know for sure. That still does not negate the issue of these spillover events, because these viruses are coming from somewhere originally. They are coming from these animals. So whether or not they have an intermediate stop in a laboratory, that certainly has an important implication for lab safety and what kind of research is being done. But again, that does not negate the important fact that these animals are coming from these viruses are coming from animals and are spillover events. So you have these live animal markets, also known as wet markets, throughout Asia. Again, they have them not only in China, in Southeast Asia, and in India as well. But it's China that has the great demand for these, particularly these exotic or endangered animals. And you have here a vendor. They've got these live frogs here waiting to be prepared for food. When you're in the tropics, you want your meat to be as fresh as possible, particularly if you don't have refrigeration. So it does make sense, actually, to keep the animals alive when you're in the tropical situation. But on the other hand, if you have them stacked on top of each other, they're defecating and they're sharing microbes. So it provides a very good viral transmission center, if you will, between animals and between animals and people. So pangolins, you may or may not know, are scaly anteaters. They are the most trafficked mammal in the world, highly endangered. Their meat and their scales are highly coveted in China. And you can see down here, tons of pangolin scales worth almost $40 million that was seized by authorities in Singapore. And it's hypothesized that that this animal might have served as an intermediate host for COVID-19, because there's some similarities between the coronavirus from this animal and from the virus that is transmitting globally in humans, but we still don't know for sure. So as of yesterday, the Johns Hopkins University has this COVID-19 resource center, and they are tracking the total number of cases. We have now almost 2 million cases globally, over 115,000 deaths. We have about 20,000 deaths in the United States alone. And then the total tested in the US is 2.8 million. So we now have the most COVID-19 cases in the world, and we probably now have also the most deaths in the world as well. So then the question is, well, should wildlife trade in live animal markets be banned to stop further microbial spillover events? Now, the challenge with that is you can ban it, but, and China did try to ban it back when 2003 with the original SARS spillover event, but then it goes into a black market, and then it becomes harder to oversee and to regulate. So it's not so much then the wildlife trade, but how do you decrease demand? So, and changing behavior and culture is extremely difficult. There is apparently now no interest in consuming pangolins in China, but it's not clear how long that sentiment's going to continue once this pandemic is over. If you haven't seen this movie, Contagion, I highly recommend it. It came out, I think in 2000, I think it came out about maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less. The most important part of this movie was actually the last 2 minutes, because it showed the virus spilling over from bats to pigs to humans. And it was loosely based on the Nipah virus that emerged in Malaysia in 1999. The virus and Contagion, and certainly Nipah virus, are a lot deadlier than the COVID-19 virus. So you see society really breaking down in this movie. But many of the things that happen in this movie are happening now, including a lot of disinformation. So unfortunately, this movie had many things right, and is worth watching if you're interested in getting more pandemic experience rather than just living through it right now. So let me switch gears now from food security and wild animals to talk now about antimicrobial resistance. And it threatens the practice of modern medicine, veterinary medicine, and agriculture. So antibiotics are the foundation of modern medicine. In humans, we use it for prevention and for treatment. Many of the treatments that we take for granted, whether they're elective surgeries, cancer chemotherapies, or immunosuppressive therapies for autoimmune diseases, many of these treatments become simply too dangerous to do because the risk for infection become too high. In livestock, antibiotics have been used for growth, which has been very political, very controversial, and has largely been banned now in Europe and the US. In the US, it's more voluntary ban. But antibiotics are still used extensively for prevention and treatment of disease. Antibiotics are used extensively in companion animals. That has not generally been discussed, but again, animals share our homes and our food and our beds with us. They also can serve as reservoirs for resistant microbes. And antibiotics are also used extensively in plant agriculture, and that has profound implications for the environment. That again is also generally not discussed. But nevertheless, all uses lead to resistance. Now, the world's largest consumers of antibiotics are India, China, and the US, and that's in total units, not in units per person. In units per person, the countries that are the largest consumers are surprisingly Australia and New Zealand. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out why Australia and New Zealand are among the highest use per capita, but I will explain in a minute as I continue on with this talk. So not only are antibiotics used extensively in many countries, but they're also available without a prescription or over the counter in many countries. In some countries, such as in Africa, antibiotics are used as a substitute for sanitation and hygiene. They're used as a substitute for primary care. They just make them available to the public. Whenever you feel a sniffle, you go to your local store and you pick up some antibiotics. And I can guarantee you that that is helping to fuel resistance as well. India and Pakistan, India has some of the most antimicrobial resistant microbes in the world. And I will get to in a few slides as to why that probably is. So as I mentioned earlier, antibiotics are used extensively in agriculture animal agriculture, plant agriculture, and aquaculture. These animals did not evolve to live in such close packed conditions. They make a lot of waste and diseases can spread. And so antibiotics are often needed to try to reduce illness. And none of us certainly want to eat sick animals. You don't want to eat an animal that was infected with something. So there's an argument for using antibiotics, and you don't want the animals to suffer with an infection either. But we have to ask ourselves, are these practices sustainable? Aquaculture releases a lot of waste into the waterways, and the fish get sick. I mean, they didn't evolve to live in closely packed enclosed areas like this. They were evolved to live in the open ocean. So as I said previously, antibiotics are given to pets, and they're generally ignored in the whole discussion on antimicrobial resistance, and yet some studies are finding that they are indeed important reservoir hosts for some of the severe resistant microbes that we're dealing with, including vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus faecium. The dogs in particular appear to be the host for the genetic precursor, which is ampicillin-resistant Enterococcus faecium. These animals generally do not get vancomycin, which is used exclusively in human medicine. But you know, if we're sharing our food, we're sharing our beds, you can be sure we're sharing our microbes with our pets. Now, I think of a kind of an analogy between antibiotics and pesticides. And while antibiotics have been the foundation of modern medicine, they kill off the good with the bad. They're killing off good bugs and bad bugs indiscriminately, and that's what pesticides do as well. They're killing off the bad pests, but they're also killing off the pollinators, the butterflies, the bees, the insects that we rely on to pollinate many of our crops for some of the most important food that we have, including fruits, vegetables, and nuts. And we're discovering then through the human microbiome studies that the microbes that are living on us and in us are as important to our health and well-being as any organ, whether it's our lungs or our heart. And so these antibiotics then, while they've been life-saving for many people with previously fatal infections, they're changing our microbiomes in ways that we're only beginning now to understand. Also, animals have microbiomes just like we do. We're sharing them, and antibiotics are affecting the animals as well. And they are affecting the biome of our planet. And that's from the massive amounts of human and animal waste that we're excreting into our environment. So we have about 1 billion people in the world, or about 14% of the world's population openly defecate, meaning that they go out into a field and squat. They either have access to a latrine or they don't, but most of them prefer to use open defecation for cultural reasons. And that's one of the reasons why India has some of the most resistant bacteria in the world, because they have the highest fraction of people who are openly defecating. And so people are living in very microbial dense environments and get sick. So people who are practicing open defecation are in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, as well as parts of East Asia as well. So this study done by Berendis in Nature Sustainability in 2018 estimated the total fecal matter produced in 1 year by the world's cattle, chicken, pigs, and people. And they estimate that we produce about 4 trillion kilograms per year. And that I estimated would fill over 1.6 million Olympic-sized swimming pools every year. So just imagine all of this fecal matter and animal manure, you know, filling up these pools around the world. We've got these massive amounts of fecal matter contaminating our environment. So where does it go? It gets applied to agricultural fields, because what else do you do with fecal matter? And the rains then cause runoff into waterways. All this excess nitrogen and phosphorus from the fecal matter causes eutrophication or algae blooms in lakes and coastal waters, and that leads to polluted water and dead fish. And it also contributes to foodborne and waterborne illnesses, leading to even more antibiotic use in an effort to try to treat the infection that was caused by fecal matter. So we've got this vicious cycle going on between the 8 billion humans on the planet, 30 billion food animals. We're producing 4 trillion kilograms of fecal matter, and it just keeps getting recycled, and more is being built up as time goes on, because this fecal matter doesn't just disappear. I mean, it does get mixed in with the soil microbes. So the whole environmental component of antimicrobial resistance is enormous and it's profound, and we generally don't talk about it, but it has an impact on our health. So there was this term that was developed called the global resistome. And for decades, we have really had no idea what's going on under the surface of the soil. Now, most of our antibiotics come from soil microbes, but many of these microbes cannot be grown in the laboratory. So we don't know what microbes are going on, what microbes exist down under the soil. And so scientists came up with a very clever strategy of extracting DNA straight from the soil. So you extract the DNA from the soil, and you can then look at the genes under the microscope. Now, they don't necessarily know from which microbe this genetic material is coming from, or which bacteria, but nevertheless, they discovered antibiotic resistance genes everywhere. They found them in the Arctic, they found them in the Antarctic, they found them ancient, dating back to the late Pleistocene era, showing resistance to tetracyclines, penicillins, vancomycin, and others. So antimicrobial resistance is not a new phenomenon, but what we are doing with our widespread application of fecal matter, both human and animal, we're using antibiotics, we're increasing the expression of these antimicrobial resistance genes in the soil. And that's because antibiotics, we used to think that bacteria used antibiotics as a form of chemical warfare against each other, but it's actually much more subtle. It appears that they use minute amounts of antibiotics as a form of communication. And by our blasting the environment with massive amounts of manure and antibiotic residues, the bacteria are responding by protecting themselves and each other by sharing these resistance genes. So it's a very profound situation that we need to discuss on a widespread basis if we want to get a handle on antimicrobial resistance. So then again, how are humans adversely impacting the global resistome? Poor sanitation and hygiene, widespread indiscriminate antibiotic use in humans and animals and in agriculture, untreated human and animal waste being applied to fields, leading to land and water contamination and the spread of resistant microbes far and wide. So it's a huge, huge problem. And one that I would argue is kind of analogous to climate change. Climate change is the waste that we are producing up into the atmosphere. There's overlap between the microbes that are producing antimicrobial resistance. There's also microbes in manure that are producing methane and nitrous oxide, contributing to greenhouse gases. So all of this is contaminating our soil, our air, our water. It's not sustainable. Now, that having been said, and while antibiotics have been critical for human health and for modern medicine, because they come with problems, including the increasing rise of antimicrobial resistance and the profound impact that they're having on our microbiome, let's think outside the box a little bit, and what would be a more sustainable way to treat bacterial infections? Well, there is a natural foe to bacteria, and they're called bacteriophages. And this was a very interesting study done in the early 2000s, looking at the microbial ecosystems in the environment. John Michelanos, who is a virologist at Harvard, was looking at the relationship between Vibrio cholera, or cholera outbreaks, and vibriophages in the waterways in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And what they found was that there was an inverse correlation between the cholera bacteria and the vibriophages. So when there was an increase in the bacteria, well, let me just back up a minute. When you had a storm, it would wash away the homeostasis that had developed between the bacteria and their phages. So under normal conditions, you have a preponderance of vibriophages or bacteriophages in the water. When a storm came or a monsoon, it would disrupt this population, and it would allow then the proliferation of the cholera bacteria in the waters. When the people would drink from the waters, you would get a cholera outbreak. The cholera outbreak would go away when the population of vibriophages increased in the waters and the population of cholera bacteria plummeted. And it goes on this cyclical basis depending on climatic conditions. So here's an electron micrograph of vibriophages that were isolated from the waters in Bangladesh. They are tiny. And again, here's another schematic showing that the number of cases will increase when you have a preponderance in the bacteria, and it will decrease as the number of phages proliferate to reduce the bacterial populations. So these phages, these bacteriophages then, are the natural foes against bacteria. Resistance is less of an issue with them because they evolve as the bacteria evolve. In fact, the whole CRISPR-Cas9 bacterial immune system was developed as a way to fight against phages. So these phages are the most prevalent bioform on the planet. It's called the virosphere. They might be a very viable strategy against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. There's a number of issues with them that has to be addressed. They are very hard to isolate and to identify, and it's not like producing a pill. You have to, it's like personalized cancer therapy. You have to personalize the treatment for each individual with a cocktail of phages, and it's very labor intensive. So it's got a lot of hurdles, and the technology around these bacteriophages are a century old. So there's a much work to be done. However, you are very fortunate to be at UC San Diego because Dr. Stephanie Strathdee and her husband, Dr. Tom Patterson, are both faculty at UC San Diego. And you may or may not be aware of this amazing story that they have, but I highly encourage you to watch Dr. Strathdee's TED Talk, How Sewage Saved My Husband's Life, if you haven't heard of it. They were vacationing in Egypt when Dr. Patterson developed a pan-resistant Acinetobacter baumannii infection that was resistant to everything. And he was medevaced to UC San Diego, where he was in intensive care and had multi-organ failure. He was dying. Dr. Strathdee, in desperation, went to the, did online searches and found this archaic type of therapy, of phage therapy. And she contacted some phage researchers, and to make a long story short, this phage cocktail saved Dr. Patterson's life. And UC San Diego is now the first in North America center. They've established a Center for Innovative Phage Applications and Therapeutics. So for those of you who are interested in nanotechnology, this is certainly something that's worthy of checking out, because I truly think that this is the wave of the future in the way medicine has to go. It's much more tailored. It only targets the bacteria that are causing the problem. It's not going to impact your whole microbiome the way antibiotics do. But again, there has to be many hurdles to overcome because they're so specific. You have to have rapid diagnostic capabilities that we do not have yet. So we are in a transition period now between moving from antibiotics, I think, to moving to other types of antibacterial strategies, such as bacteriophages, which in the long run are healthier and more sustainable. We're working with nature, not against it. So achieving the sustainable development goals, we absolutely have to address antimicrobial resistance. And I won't go into reading all of these, but this has, as you are well aware, international implications, because we all need to have the ability to treat bacterial infections. So in essence then, we have to figure out how to sustainably feed ourselves, meet our protein needs, and maintain our civilization. We want to maintain modern medicine and modern agriculture, but we're going to have to do it on a hotter, drier planet. And we need to integrate all of our efforts to benefit ourselves, humans, animals, and the environment. So we need to do this three-pronged approach, this interdisciplinary approach, a One Health approach. And there's lots of interest in One Health. There's an international student One Health Alliance. That's a Facebook group that's very active. If you're interested, please join. We have a One Health Approaches Facebook group. There's the One Health Commission that sponsors One Health Day every November 3rd. UC Davis has a One Health Institute, and every year, the day after One Health Day, they hold One Health symposiums. In Europe, they have the One Health Congress, and the One Health platform sponsors the One Health Congress. And this year it's going to be in Edinburgh, Scotland. They have a big section on antimicrobial resistance, on how to address it using a One Health approach. So with that, on behalf of the One Health Initiative, and these are my collaborators, and I want to thank you all for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kahn. Just a quick thing about how we're going to do questions to all the audience. We have some prepared questions already that the uCHARM membership can ask, and then we will open it up to the general audience. So if the uCHARM membership could start, that would be good. And remember, you can turn on your mic and camera when you ask questions.
Sure.
Hello, thank you. That was a great presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there's anyone responsible for tracking antimicrobial resistance during the pandemic or in general?
The CDC has has NARMS, the National Antibiotic Resistance Monitoring System. They are generally tracking that, although CDC is very understaffed right now, and I'm sure they're spending most of their resources on COVID-19.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi there, Dr. Kahn. Great talk. My name is John. I wanted to ask, should we worry about, kind of related to the last question, should we worry about growth in AMR during this pandemic because of increased use of antibiotics to treat secondary infections?
Yeah, I mean, all uses are going to contribute to resistance. I think the priority right now is to try and save people's lives during this pandemic. And if they do develop an antibiotic secondary bacterial infection, they're going to have to get treated with antibiotics. Ideally, particularly for those who are vulnerable, those who are elderly or who have multiple comorbidities, they should get the pneumovax shot to prevent pneumococcal pneumonias. So that is one important strategy that you know, it's hard enough to get people to get the flu shot each year, but to get people to take the pneumococcal pneumonia shot is even harder. But that would be a really important strategy to do.
Hi, Dr. Kahn. Thank you for your talk. My question is, what is done to treat animals with AMR, especially with high drug resistance densities in places such as China?
Mm-hmm. There are efforts to try to limit antibiotic use, but you know, when you've got millions of animals that are being raised together, they're inevitably going to get sick. You have to have really rigorous sanitation and hygiene, removing all the fecal waste, because again, that helps to propagate it. Those are really important strategies. And I just, you know, I don't really quite know what's going on in China. They are certainly aware of it, but how much they are able to actually address it is another question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dr. Kwan. Excuse me. Hey, hello. Thank you for the talk today. I am very inspired, and I think it was a good opportunity for us to learn about COVID and.
Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Hello, am I being heard?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. I don't know how much you've heard, but thank you for the talk today. It was a very educational time for us to learn about COVID and zoonosis. Particularly, it's of my major, the major that I study in UCSD. The question that I had proposed for you was about the what is it about bushmeat that makes it a great vector for zoonotic diseases, but I think it was sufficiently answered. So I'm gonna ask about the bacteriophage clinics right now. I've been hearing a lot about these phage clinics that is the next step in bacterial infection cure. But are there any side effects or I guess something that we should be aware of going into this new technology?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, the neat thing about phages is they are targeted towards bacteria. They do not target human cells. They are highly specific. So they should have less side effects than antibiotics. Now, there is concern, and you see this sometimes with antibiotics too, that when you kill the bacteria, then you have the release of the what's inside the bacteria when they die. And there's concern that it might set off some sort of, you know, intravascular reaction. And there was concern that phages might do that too. But at least in the case of Dr. Patterson, he had minimal to no side effects. Now, his case was really groundbreaking because it was the first time that phages were given intravenously and intraperitoneally to such a sick patient and who survived. Now, it's been tried in other cases. Sometimes, unfortunately, they wait too long and the patient dies before having the opportunity to get the phages really on board. So hopefully these phages will be used before it's the last effort rather than, hopefully they're used sooner rather than later in terms of, you know, trying to save people with resistant infections. The antifungals are another huge challenge because we are actually evolutionarily closer to fungi than we certainly are to bacteria. And so antifungals, that's why they're so toxic, because they affect fungi, which are, again, closer evolutionarily to animals, including humans. The phages are targeted towards bacteria, so they don't target human cells unless I think that if they are genetically engineered, perhaps, but I'm not aware of anybody trying to develop an engineered phage to target human cells for whatever reason, maybe cancer cells, I don't know. But I think there will be less side effects with phages than antibiotics.
Okay, thank you for the answer.
Sure.
Yeah, Dr. Kahn, thank you for the talk again. I just had a quick question about the disease transmission working backwards. So right now we have COVID-19, which is a really big deal, obviously. But even if we do cure the human population with a vaccine, is there anything we can do to stop COVID-19 from jumping into some other intermediate species and then jumping back to humans from there?
Well, One Health approach would be to develop a vaccine for animals. So, the goal for One Health is to affect the upstream drivers to prevent these diseases from getting into humans in the first place. It's a lot easier to develop a veterinary vaccine. The regulatory criteria are not as strict as for human vaccines. So if we could develop a vaccine for animals to help prevent them from developing an infection from this virus, that would be very good. And it would probably be cheaper than dealing with, the pandemic in humans after the fact. Right now we're running around putting out viral fires rather than doing preventive. I mean, think of it like your house. Are you going to buy fire insurance before the fire destroys your house or afterwards? And hopefully you do it before the fire destroys the house. And so you want to, prevent that from happening in the first place. So let's try and prevent it from jumping from the animals into the humans in the first place so we can develop a good vaccine for animals. And then we don't have to deal with human vaccines. But generally, for political reasons or whatever, people don't like to pay for public health, much less animal health, because they don't see the direct relevance for our health. And that's the whole purpose of One Health, is to show that the health of animals impacts humans, is just as important.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dr. Kahn. Thank you for your talk again. But I was just wondering, do populations like China with high instances of antimicrobial resistance in like animals also have higher instances in humans within that same like geographic location?
Yeah, they have very high levels of resistance in people and animals. And again, they have a lot of large farms where they have people living with animals, and so they get a lot more mixing, I guess, of microbes. Here in the US, we've kind of pushed all of our large farms to the heartland of the country where it's sparsely populated. So we don't even think about it. We've gotten it all out of the cities. I don't know to what extent China has done that, but they certainly have a lot more people. I mean, they have 1 billion people, and they have to feed 1 billion people. So, so the opportunity for contact with animals, I think, is larger in China. But I can only report what I've read. I've not been there, so I can't report from personal, experience what I've seen, just from what I've read about.
Okay, that wraps it up for our prepared questions. But if the audience has any questions, they can, we would prefer that you use the raise hand option on Zoom so that there's some coordination. But if not, you turn on your mic and camera and you can ask a question. Thank you.
Let's see. I don't think I see.
I think Sid, I see Sid has a question. Go ahead, Sid.
Okay.
Yep. So hi, Dr. Kahn. Thanks for the
Hello.
presentation. I was hoping to ask you about the way we currently conduct phage therapies.
Mm-hmm.
Do we usually just end up picking a virus that already exists, or do we need to engineer something novel?
What they do is you go out to some site, like a sewage site. You collect sewage water. You filter out all the garbage out of it. And you then you have to get the bacteria from the patient and plate it. And then you pour the liquid from the cleaned liquid on the plate, and then you look for areas of clearing. Those areas of clearing are where phages are killing off the bacteria that you want to kill off. So it's a very slow, very labor-intensive process, and which is why it's so expensive and why there isn't such a great business model right now, because this technology hasn't changed in 100 years, and over 100 years. So, you know, that's where we're at right now. So we're really at the infancy of phage therapy.
Ah, okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Well, I encourage all of you, when you get a chance to go back to campus, go visit the Phage Therapeutic Center and see what opportunities they might have. Because again, I think that is really exciting. It's the first in the United States, the first in the Americas, and hopefully they'll make some real breakthrough progress in this fight against antimicrobial resistance. You're really at the epicenter of where it's at. So you're very fortunate in that way. A lot of opportunities.
Okay, well, oh, is there a question? Oh, I thought I heard a question, but okay. If that's if the audience doesn't have any more questions, let's thank Dr. Kahn for taking time out of her day to educate us about this topic. It's very informative and definitely gives us a lot to think about and a lot to acknowledge. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, Dr. Kahn. We really appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. Good luck to all of you and stay well.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be sure to check out the One Health initiative. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Could I do like a courtesy